right, so our text for today is our gospel reading, which is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 20, beginning with verse 27. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died childless. The second one, and then the third, married her, and in the same way, the 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?" Jesus replied, "The people of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage. And they can no longer die, for they are like the angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the burning bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise. For he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For to him all are alive." Some of the teachers of the law responded, "Well said, teacher." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. This is the word of our Lord. So Jesus here is having a little conversation, if you will, with the Sadducees. And to give you a little context of this passage, Jesus has been teaching in the temple all day. In fact, he showed up and he was teaching, and the religious leaders, they didn't really like him. They're at this stage in his ministry where they're kind of frustrated by him. They don't like him very much. So he's teaching a little bit in the morning, and their first reaction is, "We're going to go discredit this guy." So they go over and they're like, "By whose authority are you teaching, Jesus?" And Jesus kind of sidesteps their question a little bit, but then tells this parable. There's a parable about a vineyard owner who builds this vineyard and then rents it out, and then he's sending his helpers over the years to check on the vineyard, and every time he sends them, they get beaten up and sent back or run off. And finally he sends his son, and they kill the son. And the religious leaders, when they hear this parable, they realize that Jesus is talking about them and not in a good light. So they start to get really upset at this point. They're saying, "Okay, we got to find a way to get rid of this guy." And so then they try to be sneaky, and they send some people to spy on Jesus and pretend that they're believing in Jesus, pretend that they're listening to him, and then try to trick him up in a question. And they ask him about taxes. They're like, "Should we be paying taxes to Caesar, Jesus?" And this is where Jesus picks up the coin and says, "Well, whose picture is this? It's Caesar. So give to Caesar what's Caesar's, but give to God what's God's." And so they realize once again they weren't able to trap Jesus. And so now it's the Sadducees' turn. And the Sadducees were kind of this small group of Jewish leaders. You had kind of the Pharisees and the Sadducees going on. And the Sadducees were smaller, but they had the backing of the wealthy and kind of the powerful. Whereas the Pharisees, much larger, and they had the backing of the common people. So there was kind of always this back and forth between them. But one of the other disagreements that they had is that the Pharisees believed in the resurrection and the life to come, whereas the Sadducees thought, there's no resurrection, this is the only life you get. And so if you follow God's law and God rewards you, he's going to reward you in this life, which is probably why they were so attracted to the wealthy and the powerful, because those were the people they thought God was blessing. So there was always this debate between them. And so now here they are, and it specifically says, right, that they do not believe in the resurrection. So they're trying to trick Jesus here and get him to say something that's either going to make him look foolish or turn the people against him, because remember, most of the people followed the Pharisees who believed in the resurrection. So if he says there is no resurrection, and they got the people against him, and they won't listen to him anymore. Well, it doesn't work, right? So they use this kind of snarky question. It's one of those questions where they think that they're going to win the argument just by asking the question. All right, there's this woman, she's got all these, she's got this husband, dies, doesn't have a child, so then marries the next brother, and the next brother, and the next brother. In heaven, whose wife is she? Right, here Jesus just kind of almost bypasses the overarching question of the resurrection and just kind of assumes it. He said, well, in the resurrection, that's not how it works. And he addresses the marriage thing. He says, look, there's not marriage like there is here. Like you all marry because it's different there. You're going to be eternal. You're going to be children of God. You're going to be like the angels, and it's going to be different there. They're changing or attempting to change their concept of this. What is the life like in the life to come? After Jesus returned, what will it be like? He gives us a little bit of glimpse here. Well, one difference is there's no marriage, which for me was kind of a tough one because I kind of like being married. You know, I kind of like my wife. I'd like to stay married to her, but that's not how it's going to work. But we also know, right, that in heaven we're going to be perfectly satisfied and joyful and everything. So I'm not going to be sitting there going, oh man, you know, that it will make sense and it will work. So what are some of the other things that we know about the life to come? That was kind of the discussion that I want to have today. What is life going to be like after Jesus returns? Because I think there's a lot of ideas out there. Some of them come from the Bible, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them just are things that people have come up with or sound good, but they don't really have that foundation. So the first discussion that we're going to have, our first table discussion, is just what you can choose how you want to do this. Either what do you think heaven will be like, or what do you hear people talking about what heaven will look like, and what will it be like. Does that make sense? All right, so discuss what will heaven be like is the question. All right, so what I thought we would do, these are some really good answers, what I thought we would do is read some of the Bible passages, look at some of the Bible passages that tell us, right? Because this is really where we need to look, as opposed to just kind of whatever sounds nice to us. Because one of the issues that we have, I think, as people, is that we want to describe it in terms of what we know right now, in terms of our life right now. And of course, our life right now is not perfect, and we've got sin, and we've got all of the consequences of sin. And so sometimes some of the things that we hear are really just extensions of, like, we think it's going to be just like this life, but good or better. You know, so the food will taste better, and you know, like what we say, your team always wins. You know, all those types of things. But we think of it a lot of times in this kind of a context. So what do we know? We know that first of all, that there is a resurrection. Jesus confirms that. That there will be, it's a resurrection of the dead, a physical resurrection. So we're not just disembodied souls wandering around or floating around in kind of the ethereal. They're physical bodies. And these bodies are new. They're a little different from what we know. We don't know exactly what they're like, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, it describes it. It says, so it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown perishable is raised imperishable. So what is sown able to die will raise unable to die. What is sown in dishonor is raised in glory. And what is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. So this is describing the new bodies, the new existence that we have. That they will be different in some senses. It's not going to have all the things that sin causes. So all the sickness, the weakness, death, all of these things that sin has reaped in our bodies is gone now. And so now these bodies are much better. We know that there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. In Revelation 21, it says, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. So God is recreating heaven and earth. And it's kind of this sense of this return to Eden. And when you think about Eden, you have the good creation of heaven and earth. And we had a perfect relationship with God. And God was with Adam and Eve. He would walk and talk with Adam and Eve. So it's that sense of that kind of a return to that. We know that it's something that is beyond our imagination, that is beyond anything that we have experienced. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it says, for this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And so in this, Paul is saying, I know what you're going through It's difficult, but compared to what it's going to be, compared to the goodness and the amazingness of heaven, it's nothing. It's incomparable to what heaven will be. So stay firm. Hold on. We know that it's eternal, right? There is no end to it. So our bodies have no end, but the new heaven, new earth have no end. And we know that God will be with us, right? So in Revelation it says that God will make his dwelling among us, that we will be his people and he will be our God. Again, that concept of what it was like in Eden, right? And that initial kind of Sabbath rest that we had there, that perfect relationship with God, because once again, there's no sin, right? That's a big part of this, right? We right now can't handle the presence of God. When Moses is on the mountain and he says, God, show me your glory. God's like, no, you don't want that because you're going to die. Right? So he refuses to do it. He covers his face as he passes by. John, who wrote Revelation, when the vision starts, it says that he was brought into the presence of Jesus. He sees him, and what happens? He falls over as if dead, just to come into the presence of God. Because we are sinful beings. We are corrupted with sin. And here we are in the perfect holy presence of Almighty God. But in heaven, that sin will have been removed by the grace of Jesus Christ and his blood. We will have been washed clean, and so able to stand in the presence of God and be able to worship him. We know that there will be knowledge beyond what we know today. In 1 Corinthians 13, it says, for now we see as through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now in part, but then shall I know even as I am known. God knows us fully. So there's this concept that we will be to have much greater understanding and knowledge than we have today. There will be great peace and rest. Because once again, no sin. Right? So none of the consequences of sin, none of the worry, none of the broken relationships, none of all of these things that happen because of sin that causes a lack of peace or a lack of rest are gone. And we are entered into that rest. In Hebrews 4:9 it says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Right? So kind of that return to that perfect relationship with God on this new heaven and this new earth, with these new bodies that are no sin in them. In Revelation again, and you touched on this a little bit, Judy, that there will be no more hunger, no more thirst. The sun shall not strike down on them, nor scorching heat. For the Lamb is in the midst of the throne, and he will be their shepherd and guide them to springs of living water. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And then in Revelation 21, it says he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. All of these things that it's describing are what? They're consequences of sin, consequences of the fall. And with that removed, then we no longer have those things. It's described as a paradise, right? Jesus on the cross with the thief next to him. So today you will be with me in paradise. So, what will it be like? What will we be doing? Singing, right? You mentioned that, right? That is absolutely shown. There will be worship, there will be singing. We have some of the songs that we sing are based off of some of the lyrics that we see written in Revelation and other parts of the Bible. There will be music. There will be singing and worship. I imagine that it would probably be just take the best music that you've ever heard and multiply it by 1,000,000, and that's getting close. And it's just going to be some phenomenal music. There was someone when I was talking about this morning, someone mentioned a quote of, I think it was Bach. It said, "Don't warn me when I die, because for me the music will just be beginning." He's looking forward to that, the music of heaven. What will that be like? What else will we do? We don't really know. Live in our mansion. Right, it does, and it describes the mansion, right? Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. In heaven there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. But we don't know too much about what we'll be doing here. It doesn't really tell us too much. And this is a Kurt thing, but looking at all the correlations with Eden and with that kind of return, you look at Adam and Eve, right? God didn't create them and just say, sit on your bum and you're fine, right? He gives them something to do. He says, take care of the garden, name the animals, all these types of things. So my personal opinion is that there's probably jobs that we'll have to do, but they won't be a burden, right? Because there's that concept of the heat striking your back is not just that it won't be for the summer. It's that being kind of burdened with your work and your labor. And so that we won't have. It won't be a burden, but perhaps we'll have some things like that we do. So Jesus has already talked about marriage, right? There's no marriage, but what about other relationships? What will those other relationships be like? This is another one where we don't know too much. It doesn't really describe it. We have some indications that perhaps we will recognize people from our lives, or maybe even everybody. I know you mentioned Lazarus and the rich man, and so in that, the parable, they see each other, they recognize each other after death. But then again, it's a parable, so we have to be a little careful because Jesus' point of the parable was not to teach about heaven so much. But we also have the transfiguration. And so in the transfiguration, right, you have Moses and Elijah join Jesus on the mountain, and it says the disciples recognized them, which is kind of interesting since they hadn't seen them before, right? They didn't have photos of Moses and Elijah up in the temple.
They had facial recognition.
Who's this guy? I'm told, though, that if you go to Israel now, you can get photos of Elijah and Moses if you want. That there are places that will sell that to you. So you might not want to go to those places. But so there seems to be some sort of recognition, but we don't know exactly what it will be like. Again, I think part of the idea that we'll, see the ones we love and know them as the ones we love, that's a little bit of that extension of what we think of as life here, and kind of taking that in as opposed to taking what the scriptures say, which just doesn't tell us. It could be that we walk up and be like, hey, Mom, how are you doing? But it might also be just that we just all kind of know each other as sons and daughters of God. Speaking of other things that we'll know, or may know, there will be animals. Okay, so you won't have to do your job, though. You won't need to be a vet tech because they won't be getting hurt. But it does describe animals in heaven, right? It talks about horses. It describes, it says, the lion will lay down with the lamb. Children will play with snakes and not be harmed. That was a response someone else. They're like, yeah, that's too much. We don't want that. But there are animals in heaven, but we don't know, is it going to be your little dog Fido? That we don't know. But it does describe animals in heaven. But without the violence and the carnivorous activity, it seems like there's kind of a return to maybe a vegetarian type of existence. All right, last things. I know there's kind of a lot of things to bombard you with. But last thing is that the Bible does describe degrees of glory and even rewards for the works that are done in this life. Now there's two things to note about this. One is that it doesn't really describe what that means. So we don't really want to get into too much of trying to figure out, okay, what are these degrees of glory? What are these rewards? Am I going to have a nicer car or something? Well, it doesn't describe it, right? So we kind of just say, okay, this happens, but we don't really know how. But we do know that there will be perfect joy and happiness, and there will be no envy, right? Because envy would be a sin. So there's not some sense that, well, how did that guy get into the whatever degree of glory, and I'm down here or something. That doesn't, wouldn't be how we would perceive it. We would still be in perfect joy and harmony and happiness with these rewards and however it works. And so we kind of wait to see how that will work. But I think it's a little encouragement to, go out there and get to work. So the other note with it is that these works are, and the rewards for the works are not related to salvation. Salvation is a completely separate thing. That, of course, we know is we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. You don't earn it. And so the works don't play into our salvation, but it does describe some sort of reward in heaven for those works. All right, so the next discussion that I have for you, or the last discussion actually, is having heard all of these different things, these biblical descriptions of what heaven is like, what in here maybe sticks out to you the most, or did you kind of get the most excited about? And just kind of a personal question. So which one of these things, as you heard this description, the description of heaven here from the scriptures, really kind of took hold of you? So I'll let you discuss. All right. Well, what I want to finish with is, for me, I'll just kind of share mine, the two things that kind of stuck out to me. One, you kind of already touched on a little bit, which is the presence of God, being in the presence of God, and what will it be like? Actually, as I say that, I'm reminded of, the song, and I Can Only Imagine. It's that kind of, will we stand in awe? Will we fall on our face? Will we, praise Him? Will we be able to speak at all? That kind of concept, and just to be able to be in the very presence of God. Because, we have these moments, I think, in worship where you kind of feel like I'm in the presence of God, and this is amazing. I think those are really just like a hint. It's a very small sliver of a hint of what it's going to be like when we're actually in the presence of God. But the other thing was the idea of being without sin. This was something that I hadn't really thought too much about, but I heard this a sermon by a pastor a while back. And he was finishing his sermon, and he describes the last few moments with his father before he passed. He was also a pastor. But they were talking about things and about death and heaven and everything, and his dad says, I think I can kind of imagine what it would be like to sing in the choirs in heaven and worship God. And I think that I can kind of imagine what it would be like to, just to see the beauty of heaven. But the thing that just completely escapes me, that I can't even begin to imagine, is my life without any sin. Neither me sinning, or the inclination to sin, or even the consequences of sin, all that, because it mars our lives. Right? It's something that's constantly with us. But thanks to the grace of God, it's gone. Right? We are washed clean by the blood of the Lamb, and we stand before Him without any sin, without any desire for sin. And that's going to be an amazing gift that we receive by the grace of Jesus Christ through faith in Him. So that, to me, that was one of the things that absolutely, I still can't grasp my mind around it. But I think it's an amazing thing to think about, this gift that we've gotten into, to kind of filter out all of the stuff that's not really true, that just sounds really nice, and hear the real truth of what it's going to be like. It's amazing. I think it's even more amazing when we stop trying to put it in terms of just our existence, because that's so marred with sin. Right? To have this existence that doesn't have that, it's going to be very different in that sense. But amen. So let's say a little prayer, and then we'll